weekly show where we discuss the top developments across the world over the last 7 days with our guest and expert, Tridivesh Singh Maini. Thanks very much, sir, as always, for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you.
At the top, sir, I want to discuss the relations which are currently strained between three important allies. I'm talking about France, Australia, and US and the AUKUS deal. France is understandably angry and disappointed that the deal fell through. It had an important submarine deal with Australia, but now it feels backstabbed by its own allies. So how do you see this impacting the unity of countries on the Indo-Pacific strategy? Besides that, do you see this impacting the Quad grouping as well?
Okay, so the first thing is that it's not just France. Even some other allies have been uncomfortable, but they haven't expressed it in public, right? So a couple of things. If you look at the Quad, for instance, and actually India and Japan have not said anything publicly, but they will also have to look at other options, not just in terms of for India, for instance, it's not just about countering China, but it's also about balancing. So if you look at the recent SCO meet, which we'll come to later, there is an attempt, both sides, India and China, making an attempt to at least have some sort of working relationship to reduce their tensions. So that's one part of it. The other is there is also scope now for India and France to work more closely. As it is, the relationship has been strengthening bilaterally and in the context of the Indo-Pacific as well. Right? Now, if you look at the AUKUS, damage control efforts have been made by the US. President Biden had a conversation with Emmanuel Macron, and basically the US and Australia both have said that, while AUKUS in principle there's nothing wrong with it, and we stand by what the agreement, but this could have been done in a better manner. There has been a subtle acknowledgement of that. We also need to bear in mind that even Macron himself, the US, obviously, if you look at the Trump administration, had been skeptical. It's not only the Indo-Pacific we're talking about. France has said, that, on the one hand, that the US and Australia have been saying that France is an important stakeholder in the Indo-Pacific. It's also about NATO, right? Because, obviously, the Trump administration had been critical of NATO, and even within France, there had been skepticism of NATO as well. So France, again, also needs to there has been rethinking going on, and as it is, a lot of Macron has faced criticism within France that, he's been banking too much on the US, for instance. Right? Now, I may want to look at it. There are two aspects to it. On the one hand, you have obviously US, UK, and France in NATO. And on the other, you also have Australia, New Zealand, and the US in something called the ANZUS alliance. Right? Now, New Zealand also has said that they will not allow these submarines to enter. There are certain agreements in the past under which the submarine will not be allowed to enter New Zealand. So that has also been said. So if you look beyond the trilateral and if you look beyond the French reaction, there are multiple ramifications. For now, I think damage control has been done. Obviously, France is miffed at the fact that this agreement signed in 2016 is being shelved. And I don't think, even if publicly they say that, we've been able to resolve issues, there will be problems. And then France will look at alternatives. And also, this also raises the question about that, to what even just, again, what we have discussed earlier, that the point about just the threat from China being a glue is not sufficient, because within that there are numerous, layers, there are numerous divisions and all, and countries will also need to gradually, as I said, if you can find some common ground with China and reduce the tensions, that is likely. So you are going to have theaters of conflict. You will have, obviously, there is no doubt about numerous countries feeling threat from China, whether in Southeast Asia, South Asia, Africa, and everything. But you also have to have a manageable relationship with them, and you can't just be blind. You can't kowtow to the US or Western countries.
So at this point, talking about China, would you also like to shed some light on the UNGA address by President Biden and the Chinese president as well?
Okay, so very interesting. So on the one hand, you have Biden saying that he does not believe uh, in a Cold War sort of narrative, which means that obviously after uh, uh, days after AUKUS and day before the in-person meeting of Quad, he's trying to also send out a message to China that you're not only, the target is not just China. I mean, I guess the propelling factors are that you have to work to, on a number of issues, as like we've discussed, Afghanistan, climate change. That's one part of it. Second, again, a number of allies, US allies, obviously are miffed at the US. So, with an eye on balancing that out, that is one part of it. And also, from the beginning itself, uh, Biden had been warned by a number of analysts in the US that don't, that the relationship with China doesn't have to be only about conflict. I mean, obviously, there'll be more competition and some cooperation. So, whereas if you look at the Trump administration, it moved, even the part about competition had moved purely to conflict. And in fact, Biden had right away after taking over as president, even on issues like technology, he had said that we're not just going to block Chinese technologies, we're going to come up with an alternative. Now, what has emerged is also that, while some good beginnings were made, but in the last few months, I don't think that, the Biden administration has equipped itself very well on a number of issues. And not allies, and even those who were trying to balance out, have not been very convinced by the efforts. On the other hand, the Chinese president has Xi Jinping, in spite of being aggressive on international platforms, he's been making the right noises, and he has since 2017, after the victory of Donald Trump, he has seen that there is a vacuum, and he's trying to, wherever he can, he's trying to fill that in. Now, in practice, China is not, committed either to multilateralism. Globalization is also not of the Western sort. But, the messaging is correct. And as I said, that to be, each country ultimately sees its own interest. And obviously, even those who are wary of China realize that, you cannot totally be in one camp. So in that sense, Xi Jinping's message is not going to really convince people, to any country to move closer to China, but it will further increase the skepticism vis-a-vis the US. So international politics that way is very complex. Now, and you're back to the other thing is where on the one hand, we say that, and that's true, that you don't necessarily look at the world order from a zero-sum perspective. On the other hand, if you look at AUKUS, if you look at QUAD, so you are back to that same, balance of power, balance of threat sort of narrative, right? The dimensions keep on changing according to, changing.
Right. So if we talk about the SCO summit last week, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Afghanistan again dominated the conversation. What are the biggest takeaways from that?
First is Iran has got full membership. Iran was earlier an observer. So Iran happens to be, I think, the ninth country. Iran, and if you look at the address of the Iranian president, he made some very important points. Not only was he predictably critical of the US for its policy vis-a-vis Iran, he also said that, that SCO is an independent platform. And saying that, alluding to the fact that this is an anti-West. I think that is obviously the Iranian point of view, but it's certainly a non-Western platform where you have India on board as well. So it's important. And, if you look at the way the organization has evolved, initially it was just Shanghai 5. Basically, SCO was set up in 2001. And it was the Shanghai 5, which basically converted into the SCO. And then you had India and Pakistan got full membership in 2017. And now, of course, you have Iran as part of it. Now, there are multiple levels, So one, obviously, for countries, for Iran, for India, for China, for Russia, they're all basically competing in different ways, for both strategically and economically, for greater clout in Central Asia. So one, in that sense, it's an important platform. You have important Central Asian republics which are members. And that's why if you see on the sidelines, there were some very important meetings with Central Asian countries. That's one part of it. Second is you also have, if you look at the regional connectivity initiatives So again, about something which the Iranian president said, that the Belt and Road Initiative and the international, North-South, transport corridor, INSTC, of which India has been taking interest. And basically, there has been a proposal to extend Chabahar port, from through Chabahar port to Central Asia, Russia, and then to Europe. And now, there has been this narrative that INSTC is a sort of competitor of the BRI or an alternative narrative. Now, the Iranian president said that both can go hand in hand. Now, this is interesting because obviously, with the improvement in ties between Iran and China, Iran becomes an important component of BRI. And as far as the Chabahar port is concerned, obviously, India has been taking greater interest in that. So that's something which now that paves the way for looking at the shades of gray even in the China-India relationship. So, and that if you look at the bilateral meeting, on the sidelines with the foreign ministers, I mean, there are clear references to the fact that both need to work together. I think what was also interesting was a tweet by the Indian foreign minister where he said that you don't need to, China should not view its ties with India from the prism of a third country, which is the US. Now, obviously, this was days before the in-person QUAD summit and before the bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Biden. So, I think SCO in that sense is very interesting. It also actually essentially summarizes how the current world order is. While we've always seek to look for black and white, this was bound to happen. Obviously, I mean, I think the US isolationism has accelerated or exacerbated this trend of certain countries, get sort of pushing back from their proximity to the US and look at alternatives. But the way the world order is emerging, in any case, is bound to happen. And I think also a message also goes across, even it's not just the US, but even China within the SCO. I mean, for Iran, for instance, to talk about a project where India is involved, where other countries are involved, that's important. And we must also bear in mind that Russia, if you look at Central Asia, Russia and China are not totally on the same page. There has been competition in Central Asia. So I think there are multiple layers and all need to be looked at.
So I'll shift our focus now to the Canadian elections. Justin Trudeau and his Liberal Party are back in power, but they didn't get a majority this time. So how do you read the developments there? What do you think Trudeau's being back, how does that affect Canadians? How does that impact the world? And also there are many Indo-Canadian lawmakers this time. So what is the impact on Indians?
Okay, so the first thing is, if you look at the election, obviously there has been criticism that why Justin Trudeau held this election, 2 years before it was actually due, right? But obviously he saw that his handling of the pandemic sort of gave him a good chance. And even last time he didn't have a full majority. But I think a couple of points. One, the handling of the pandemic in terms of the vaccination, the amount of money which has been spent to sort of help out people, who've been laid off, even companies. A lot of money was, there were programs which to prevent companies, from laying off workers. So obviously they were given support by the government. Now, the fiscal deficit has risen as a result of that, but that has helped Justin Trudeau. And that was, at this point of time, that was needed. And okay, the other thing, if you look at from domestic politics, Justin Trudeau also had, pointed to Alberta, which has been ruled by the Conservatives. And I think the handling of the pandemic has been really bad over there. Conservatives have been opposed to lockdowns. They have questioned vaccination. Like, in the US also, the Republicans have been questioning, whether there should be anything. So that is the domestic politics. In terms of the global narrative, I think, again, Canada was the first, even in the midst of this whole, this juggernaut of right-wing leaders, Trudeau was, one of the Liberal mascots. And again, he has obviously managed, even if the margin has reduced, he's managed to stand reasonably firmly. So that's important in the context of the global narrative. And if you look at even the manifesto also, there is talk about the authoritarian regimes have been criticized. There is talk of asylum to Afghans, right? So I think very important. Obviously, the diaspora has done very well in politics, not just, but in recent years, obviously, we've had a rise, of the number of individuals of Indian origin. And I think the very important position is that of, the defense minister, for instance, Harjit Singh Sajjan, because Canada is part of the Five Eyes, alliance, which includes obviously US, New Zealand, Australia, and UK. So I think it's not just, we always look at it, that on the basis of representation and symbolism, but there are professionals, Indian professionals. That's one part of it. And also a greater representation to women. Out of these candidates who have won, there is a significant number, you have a number of prominent policymakers who are also women. So that is important. So I think we tend to look at it from the diasporic angle, but they're all professionals in their own right. They've done very well over there. So I think that's something.
Great. Devesh sir, thanks very much for joining us this week and breaking down geopolitics for us. And to our viewers, stay tuned for our next episode next week. Thank you.